So, if you're looking for the origin story of political murder, the kind that happens right out in the open, disguised as hospitality, you really have to start in ancient Rome.
You really do. And we're about to dive into, well, the history of what you could call culinary assassination. We're not just talking about the act of poisoning that's, as old as humanity.
Right.
We're talking about a formal political tradition of using food and wine as a weapon. And just so you know, this whole deep dive is built on historical theory, archaeological finds, and just centuries of scholarly work on Roman records.
And our mission really is to figure out why. Why Rome? Why did it become the sort of epicenter for this dark art? And why were the Romans themselves so incredibly meticulous about documenting it all? Because in the imperial era, a banquet, it was never just a party. It was high-stakes political theater. The dinner table was a place of vulnerability, of negotiation, and, well, often of execution.
And the most fascinating part is that the deadliest weapons weren't, daggers under the table. They were the most common things in the Roman diet.
The things you'd never suspect.
Exactly. We're zeroing in on two specific items that became almost synonymous with murder: wine and garum.
Garum, the infamous fermented fish sauce.
That's the one. Wine was the perfect camouflage. Its complex flavors could easily hide a bitter poison. And garum, that pungent, savory sauce, was the ideal way to cover up any strange smell or aftertaste.
So these two ingredients, staples for everyone, rich and poor, they form the foundation of what history now calls the Roman poison tradition.
So the big question for us is, how did these everyday items go from being simple food to sophisticated tools for regime change? Let's get into it.
Okay, let's set the stage first. The Roman feast, the convivium.
Yeah.
If you got an invitation to one of these high-status dinners, you were basically walking onto a battlefield.
Disguised as a dining room, yeah. Every single detail, where you sat, what exotic dish was put in front of you, it was all a statement about power and status.
And when the stakes are that high, when an emperor's favor's on the line,
You see specialization, of course. Poisoning became so common, so reliable, that you had professionals, recognized figures even, and they had this incredible title, conditores mortis.
conditores mortis.
Literally, the cooks of death.
Wow, the cooks of death. I mean, that suggests a level of accepted professionalism, doesn't it?
Anya.
It wasn't just some angry servant grabbing whatever toxic berries they could find.
Oh, absolutely not. This implies careful planning, skill, expertise.
Yeah.
We're talking about people-trusted servants, sometimes even physicians who specialized in toxicology and culinary disguise. Their job wasn't just to slip the poison in, it was to know exactly how it would react with heat, with spices, with the fermentation of the wine.
And this is where Rome becomes so unique, the written record.
That is the core difference,
Right.
right? People were killing each other with toxins long before the Romans. But Rome obsessed over writing down the details.
Yeah.
We know about this tradition because of the incredible volume of documentation from major historians. It wasn't just gossip, this was historical analysis. You have Plutarch detailing political intrigues.
Tacitus, of course, with the Annals, a year-by-year account of the emperors.
Then Suetonius, whose The 12 Caesars is basically a tell-all biography of the imperial family's dark side, and Cassius Dio writing his massive Roman history.
And it's not just the historians. Even Pliny the Elder, in his natural history, he's documenting substances that could be used for murder. You even get context from the Roman cookbook, Apicius.
So when you pull all that together, you realize this isn't just a list of suspicious deaths. It's a huge cross-referenced file on state-sponsored or politically motivated murder, all happening at the dinner table.
It just proves that this was an entrenched political strategy. It was woven right into the fabric of imperial life.
But a strategy is only as good as its delivery system.
Which brings us back to that deadly duo, wine and garum.
Let's start with wine. It was, the perfect delivery vehicle for a few key reasons. First, it was everywhere, ubiquitous, served at every meal to every social class, and often drunk in really large quantities.
And the way they prepared it helps too, right?
Yeah.
Roman wine wasn't always this crystal clear thing we think of. It was often cloudy, sometimes spiced, or even boiled down to a syrup.
Exactly. So if you drop some powdered hemlock into a dark, spiced, heavily flavored wine, who's going to notice?
No one.
The complex fermentation, the additives they used, things like lead acetate as a sweetener, which was itself poisonous over time. It meant that a bitter taste or some cloudiness was completely normal. It hid the poison physically and chemically.
And they knew this. The Romans were very aware of this risk.
They were, which is where you get that famous line from Pliny the Elder.
Wine gives life, and wine takes life away. It just sums up the whole political risk of taking a drink, doesn't it?
It really does. And the threat was real. The Historia Augusta documents an attempt on an emperor where the poison was mixed right into the wine supply. It was an occupational hazard of being in charge.
Okay, so wine handles the flavor, mostly.
Yeah.
But to really hide a potent, maybe smelly poison, you need the heavyweight champion of Roman concealment,
And that would be garum.
the fish sauce.
Yes. Garum was absolutely essential to Roman fine dining. A highly prized, deeply concentrated sauce made from fermenting the guts and blood of fish-like mackerel with tons of salt for weeks or months out in the sun.
Just hearing how it's made suggests a powerful aroma.
Oh, overwhelmingly pungent,
Yeah.
deeply savory, incredibly strong, the ultimate umami bomb of the ancient world. And because it was expensive to make and import, high-quality garum was a status symbol.
So if you're a cook of death and you have a poison with a weird smell or a mineral taste like arsenic,
You bury it. You bury it completely in this thick, salty, intensely fishy sauce. It is the perfect mask. And this is where it gets really interesting for modern historians. There's this whole debate about accidental versus intentional murder with garum.
how so?
Well, that fermentation process, especially in the Mediterranean heat, was inherently unstable.
Meaning a bad batch of garum could kill you even if no one was trying to.
Absolutely. The whole thing relied on high salt and warm temperatures, but if the bacterial balance was off, if you got anaerobic bacteria, botulinum toxins, that fancy condiment could become instantly lethal,
Which adds a layer of plausible deniability.
a huge one. If a rival dies after dinner, was it the conditor mortis slipping in arsenic, or was it just a bad jar of fish sauce? It complicates everything immediately.
So you've got wine to dissolve and distribute the poison and garum to mask the taste and smell, all with this built-in alibi. It's a terrifyingly elegant combination.
And that combination is what sets the stage for probably the most famous culinary assassination in all of ancient history.
We have to talk about the death of Emperor Claudius, AD 54. This wasn't just a murder. This was a political maneuver that completely changed the course of the Roman Empire.
And the person behind it was his own wife, his fourth wife, Agrippina the Younger. She was driven by this fierce ambition to make sure her son, the young Nero, would become emperor, not Claudius's own biological son, Britannicus.
The banquet was the scene, of course. According to the sources, especially Tacitus in the Annals, Claudius was served a very specific dish.
Mushrooms, most likely. They were a real delicacy, and they're often served in these rich, complex sauces.
And mushrooms are perfect for this, aren't they? They're porous, they soak up flavors.
And some types are naturally deadly anyway. So Agrippina's assassins, led by a poisoner named Locusta and Claudius's own taster, had to be sure the poison was completely hidden. They used those mushrooms, saturated in a sauce that almost certainly had a ton of garum to deliver the toxin.
But the first dose didn't quite work, did it? The story is that he started to get sick, maybe threw it up.
That's right. Tacitus describes this crazy sequence. The first poisoning attempt is in the dish. When Claudius starts to struggle, they realize the plot might fail.
So they needed a plan B.
They did. They administered a second lethal dose. Reportedly, they used a poisoned feather, shoved it down his throat, pretending to help him vomit. Whether it was the feather or a second dose in some gruel, the intent was clear. He had to die. Right then.
And what's so remarkable is the impression that murder left. Later, Roman writers would say the emperor was killed by a dish rather than a sword. It wasn't just random violence. It was a strategically deployed piece of food that cleared the way for Emperor Nero. It shows the incredible power of the kitchen.
It solidified this idea that the real threat to your power wasn't coming from the legions out on the frontier. It was coming from the person serving you dinner.
Which brings us back to that core question. Why Rome? We've said poison wasn't new, so why does Rome mark this first major stage in the history of culinary assassination?
It's the systemic political use of it combined with that obsessive record keeping. Rome wasn't just using poison. They were meticulously documenting the victims, the motives, the methods, down to the type of sauce or wine used, and the political fallout.
That's what turns it from a bunch of murders into a documented tradition.
Precisely. The fact that we have these incredibly detailed accounts of specific plots, not just vague rumors, that shows how deep this cultural phenomenon went.
Right.
And think about the scope. There are detailed records of attempts to poison Emperor Tiberius, the paranoia around Caligula's banquets, Piso's plot with the poisoned wine. Even the mysterious death of the philosopher Lucretius was chalked up to poison.
So for almost 2 centuries, This threat was just a fundamental part of being a Roman elite.
It was. And modern historians, people like Andrew Dalby and Patrick Fays, they've recognized this as a legitimate field of study. They synthesized these sources to understand how these food crimes shaped the political landscape.
They treat it not just as sensationalism, but as this critical intersection of forensics, toxicology, and imperial politics.
Exactly. Rome gives us the foundation for understanding how power and vulnerability meet right there at the dining table.
So, if we zoom out, the main lesson from the Roman poison tradition is, well, it's chillingly simple. Power, even absolute imperial power, is incredibly fragile.
Very.
Wine, the drink of celebration, became a perfect murder weapon. And garum, this symbol of culinary prestige, was the ultimate disguise for death.
And we learn that the fate of the entire Roman Empire, and really the subsequent path of Western civilization, could hinge on the recipe for a single dish served to one man.
The stakes just couldn't have been higher.
Yeah.
So here's something for you to think about as you process this deep dive. Even if we can't pinpoint the very first food murder in all of human history, Rome shows us the moment in time when documenting food as a political weapon became central to how we talk about power.
So if the Romans themselves recognized, cataloged, and feared that their political destiny could depend on a perfectly disguised dish of mushrooms and fish sauce, what does that meticulous record-keeping say about power and vulnerability and trust when we all sit down at a shared table today? The food has changed, but that fragility of trust, it's still exactly the same.